My name is Jillian Smith. I'm one of our business development managers at Congressional Federal Credit Union, and I'll be the MC for the evening. So if you have any questions, you can either direct them to me or to the gentleman to my left. Just a little bit about Congressional Federal. We provide innovative and affordable financial products and services, education, and community outreach to the Congressional Federal family. This includes not only the House of Representatives, but congressional support offices and any functions that are going on the Hill, as well as our partners that are not affiliated with the Hill, and they're in DC locally as well. We were established in 1953. We started with just 8 members and $40. We've since grown to over 47,000 members worldwide and over $800 million in assets. So, needless to say, we started with very humble beginnings and we've grown substantially from there. Congressional Federal has developed a reputation as a trusted credit union based on its proven track record of reliability with its members. So today's presentation should run a little over an hour. We're going to include question and answer time throughout the presentation. So after kind of each segment, I'll just kind of check with everybody, make sure there's any questions. And if you're on Facebook Live as well, feel free to write them in the comment section. And we'll, hi guys, and we'll do our best to answer those as quickly as possible. So, leave comments and ask questions. We like to keep it conversational. So, and also, if you stick around till the end, we are actually hosting a raffle for an Amazon gift card. So, after the presentation, please fill out the evaluations and submit to us, and we'll get you entered into a raffle. And tonight, we're going to be covering a lot of information, because let's be honest, credit is a very, very large subject. So, if you have additional questions, please stop by and speak with us after or email us. We'll definitely follow up with you. So, without further ado, I'll go ahead and kick this off. I have to my left Greg Jenkins and James Patton. Greg is our Consumer Lending Director with over 16 years of experience in consumer lending management with the credit union industry. His experience included consumer credit finance, financial counseling, as well as portfolio management. He's committed to helping the credit union meet members' needs, both financial and lending. He's been our Director of Consumer Lending Department at Congressional Federal Credit Union since March 2015, so almost 2 years. All right, and Jay, to the left, is an account executive who has spent the majority of his career in the financial service industry. He's experienced working with different types of organizations, such as credit unions, banks, finance companies, and collections agencies. He's dedicated to overseeing the relationship and business development efforts of both his existing accounts and prospects in the Mid-Atlantic region to ensure the best quality service. So, I know that was a lot. Hopefully you're still with me. Let's go ahead and I'm just going to ask a general question. How many of us have checked our credit in the last year? I see a lot of hands up. Yay, good. If you haven't, that's okay as well. That's why we're here tonight. We're here to provide you with the information and knowledge so that you can learn how to check your credit and really be aware of what's on your credit report. So, since not all of us have checked our credit in the last year, let's talk about managing and monitoring our credit. So where do we start? Let's start at the beginning. What's a credit report? Does anybody know what goes into it? Jay, would you like to enlighten us?
I was going to say, if you don't, by the time you leave, you will.
Yes.
Okay, that's the good news. So, kind of high level, credit report, it's nothing more than a snapshot of a consumer's financial obligations, right? It's composed of various sections, which I'll discuss, but basically it's just that. It's a measurement of who you are in terms of your financial obligations to determine an individual's creditworthiness, basically. The credit report includes the header record, which is typically found at the top of a credit report. That's basic demographic contact information, your name, your address, employment information, previous addresses. It includes alerts and special messages. Things like if you've ever been a victim of fraud, or if you've wanted to put a specific note on your credit report, you can do so. Typically, it's associated with if you've been a victim of fraud or had any type of major dispute in the past. There is the collection accounts section. Any derogatory accounts that are on your credit report appear on there as well. Typically, the bulk of our credit report is the trade line, what I call the trade line section. There are your individual accounts, both your credit revolving accounts that you might have, retail store cards, credit cards, various lines of credit, and your installment accounts, your mortgages, your auto loans, things of that nature. Additionally, on the credit report, you have inquiries. So if you've been out shopping for credit, applying for something, when that credit report is pulled through that credit grantor, that inquiry will show up on your credit report. All very important information. And then lastly, not everybody obviously has this, there's a public record section. If there was anything that denoted a public record, that may or may not be reported on your credit file as well. So basically it's just that. It's a snapshot of J. Patton's today. These are my financial obligations. This is kind of a profile of what I have going on in terms of my credit, my history within my credit, and some contact information that's utilized for various reasons on the credit report. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody have an appreciation, or did you have an understanding of that really is what it's all about coming in?
I know everybody frantically wrote down everything Jay just said, but if you didn't write it all down, there was a handout off the table that says how to read your credit report. Hopefully you'll grab that. If not, that's okay. We can hand it to you at the end of the seminar today. So that's perfect then. So you can delve into that a little bit more. Okay, thank you, Jay.
Absolutely.
Greg, why is good credit so important?
That's a great question. Whether we realize it or not, having good credit, or the fact that we as Americans have a credit industry and a credit profile to our names, it really affects everything that we do in our lives. And a lot of us think, well, it affects my ability to get a loan, and that's true. But we may not always think about the effect of the cost of that loan. So having good credit is very important to our lives because it allows us to save more money. For example, if you were to get a $400,000 mortgage at 4%, that's good. But if you had that credit, you were still able to get that mortgage at 4.5%. Oh, 0.5%, that's not much. Over 30 years, over the life of that loan, you're going to pay about $43,000 more in real dollars because of your credit. So credit is very important to our lives because when we think about our lives holistically, the opportunity costs, I think everybody in this room, everybody at home can appreciate the fact that I would love to have $43,000 extra dollars at the end of the day to be able to fund my retirement or purchase that home or second home or fund my child's education. So when we think about everything, it becomes very, very important. And also, just so that everyone's aware, when you do business with many companies, they're going to pull your credit. So your ability to get a cell phone could be dependent upon your good credit. Your ability to rent that apartment or a home could be dependent upon your credit. You may be denied these lifestyle things, these things that help you progress in your life. There's many different areas that affect our credit. And it's just important to think about in all that we do, how we can save money by having good credit.
Did everybody know that sometimes if you're looking for a new position or a new job, your employer can check your credit as well, depending on where you're working? That's kind of eye-opening as well. I think that's just a neat tidbit.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So there's 3 credit reporting agencies. There's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, right? Why are there three reporting agencies? Why do we have to have 3?
Yep. Great question. Anybody maybe have an idea of why there are 3? I know why. I'm going to share that with you in a minute. So it kind of just dates back to when credit grantors had started out kind of in their own communities. They had all just kind of set up shop and were reporting specifically within the community, and that concept branched out. And with the establishment of the CRAs, the credit reporting agencies, they were very geographically displaced when it first started back in the 70s. So Experian, being a West Coast headquartered credit reporting agency, historically would handle reporting for that part of the country, say Arizona West, and I'm just kind of using it as an illustration. TransUnion, being headquartered in the Midwest, would work with various institutions and collect the data to report back on the credit report for that part of the country. And then Equifax, based out of Atlanta, would be more the Southeast and the East Coast. So I kind of think back to when I first started out in credit card operations back in the 90s. Depending upon where an applicant's application application came through, we would say, oh, Arizona, pull this report, right? Go to this credit report file and pull this one. New York, pull this one. That was the case probably up until really about 7 to 8 years ago when, because of technology and the ability to report and more institutions reporting too, I should mention, in the last 7 to 10 years, it's really, we're on the same playing field, really, I guess is what I'm saying. Probably 95% of any institution that's reporting that type of data to one of the credit reporting agencies is reporting to all three today, which, from my perspective, not just representing one of the credit reporting agencies, but from a consumer, it's really what you want, right? Because you want to have both good and bad. You want to have that information equally shared out there. Because why, right? People move, you open up new accounts, you close accounts, and the more accurate, the more consistent, the more information that can be shared across the agencies, the better off the consumer or the public's going to fare from having it reporting across all three.
Now, is all the information that they collect the same?
It is. So it's pretty much the same. It's just the reporting standards are a little bit different across all three. What I mean by that is the way that maybe some data is coded or formatted. But for the most part, the things we talked about with the credit report, the data that comes over, for example, Greg has an auto loan, the type of data that is collected, when it was opened, the term, the balance, the rate, that information should be reported the same, and it is. It's reported across to all three bureaus from that lending institution in the same manner. Again, it's just formatted and coded differently sometimes, based upon how that credit reporting agency needs to have it report to their database. Does that make sense?
Does everybody understand? Any questions so far? Any on Facebook? Not yet. Okay.
Quiet group.
Some fingers. I know, very, very quiet tonight.
Sure.
Have a question, sir?
So if you guys are all looking at the same data and the same person, why would the scores vary between the three?
So it fluctuates a little bit because of, again, how the data is captured, how the data is being presented back through that reporting agency. It could be a difference of timing sometimes. Sometimes people are reporting on a monthly basis, sometimes they're reporting on a daily or weekly basis. Generally speaking, though, and it's something, just kind of looking down through my notes, we'll talk about it a little bit more in terms of scoring. 99% of the credit institutions are all using the same scoring methodology, the FICO, the Fair Isaac score. You do have some fluctuations. I know I've looked at mine, I look at them annually, and I do kind of go across all three, and I see slight fluctuations. You really shouldn't see anything probably beyond, like, say, 20 to 30 points in terms of a difference. That's why, though. There are some subtle disparaging differences between how the data is reported and how it's mined, I guess, and how it's captured on the reports across the credit reporting agencies.
Great question, thank you. All right. Any other questions so far? All right, I like it. So let's move along to actually understanding our credit. What is going to affect things? How do I check the score? What is the score? What's it made up of? There's so many questions that we all want to know the answers because we need to know so we can make changes and improve our credit if that's the case. So what is the credit score and how is it calculated? What goes into it?
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess maybe just a quick show of hands. Did everybody know that the FICO score is the predominant score that's used in the United States today? You might hear some other scores out there, but FICO has pretty much been the bread and butter score since like the 70s, I believe, and they're obviously always recalibrating and updating their score. But basically the score is just that, right? It's a calculation. It evaluates how you as an individual, your performance. It looks at 5 categories that I'll talk about, weighted categories, but it's basically how you're paying your bills on time, how you're treating your credit, and how do you kind of stack up as a whole against other individuals based on those weighted categories. It's an algorithm is what it is, really. And what it's looking at is I'm going to cheat because I've got some percentages here that I want to make sure I get right. It's looking at 5 categories, so it's looking at payment history. So how's your payments been over the time that you've had established credit? It's 35% of that weighted model that creates that FICO score. The next one is the debt, the amount that you owe that's showing on your credit report between all those different types of accounts we talked about. It's 30%. So think about it, payment history and the type of debt and the amount of debt That's 65% already of the score. So pretty important. And I'm bringing that up because as we start to talk about things about developing good credit habits, a lot of them are going to go back to this algorithm and these scores and the weighted values of the importance of your score. The length, the age of the credit that you have, the history. So have you had an account on your file that's been on your file reporting for 10 years? Or are you just starting out? Obviously, the longer you've had established credit, the better that it's going to be towards driving that score if the credit's managed and utilized properly. That is 15%. And then you've got two that are at 10%. You've got new inquiries, new trades that are being opened, trades being those types of accounts, credit revolving and installment loans. And you also have a mix of accounts at 10%. They actually factor in, looking at your snapshot, what is the mix of Greg's credit file? Is it 70% installment loans, 30% credit revolving, vice versa, or is it an even mix? There's obviously, there could be more emphasis on less revolving. There could be more strain with more revolving accounts. So they factor that into the bigger picture and kind of in taking a look at your entire debt structure within your credit file and those accounts. And sorry, I want to make sure I cover this too. And also the FICO score, the generic range that's used out there, you probably hear about a score, it's 300 to 850. And then that can be a little bit different depending upon the version of FICO. For example, there's a classic industry model and there's an auto model as an example. But for the most part, that 300 to 850 is the range that's consistent in the industry, that's consistent with credit and across all of the various credit grantors that are out there using that score. So it's kind of important to know where you fall, on that scale, in terms of that 850 kind of being that peak pinnacle point, and then obviously if you've had some derogatory issues and things like that, it's going to be a little bit lower. So does that make sense? Does that help you guys understand a little bit about it? And I know before I got into the business, I didn't realize that score, what it's comprised of and how it's weighted and so forth. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And again, when we cover some of the points we covered today, I think it'll resonate a little bit with everybody as well. Yeah.
Question.
Sure.
Could you repeat that second category that comprises 30%?
Yeah. The second category was your the amount of debts, the amounts that are owed on those accounts.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Questions?
So if you kind of don't have a long history of credit, are you going to kind of start off in the middle range, or do you want to start high like an 850?
Well, so that's a great question, and then not knowing the algorithm specifically, obviously as you build credit, even with minimal credit, if you're, at least from my personal experience, from when you're starting out and you're using it the way it's supposed to be used and you're making payments on time, you're gonna, so to say, come out of the gates, I guess, with what I would consider a good score, right? That like 650 plus score, for example. But one thing I want to be careful of, kind of when we're talking about this, is not trying to get very specific on the score, because it's not something that I'm involved in or my company's involved in. Fair Isaac kind of owns and controls that algorithm. But that's a great question. I think, and again, as we go through tonight's Healthy Credit Seminar, you're going to lead with some good tips and some habits is really the goal here. Understanding kind of the premise and the basis behind credit, which is why we're covering some of this up front, and then kind of go more into some of the habits and things you can do to make sure you're addressing these specific things that affect your credit. Yeah.
And I'll add a little bit to that if I may. That is a good question, sir. And I look at credit reports all the time. It's what I do. It's what I've done for 16 years in the industry. Looking for a financial institution, people apply for loans, and we review their credit. And a misconception commonly out there is that, hey, if I'm just getting started, I'm starting with perfect credit because I haven't done anything wrong yet, right? And what generally happens is if you're starting out with your credit life, you're going to start somewhere around 700, and that's a ballpark. It depends on a lot of different factors. But no one starts out at 850 unless you built up years and decades of established credit before you start out all the way to the top. And once you start out around 700, again, that's a very generic number. What you do from there affects the momentum of that score.
Right.
If you miss one payment, what's going to happen? It's going to start creeping down. If you never miss a payment, it's going to start creeping up. If you start taking on a whole lot of debt, it's going to start creeping down. If you keep your debt low, you're going to do fine. But you start off somewhere in the middle, and then you build your profile from there. But no one starts out at an 850. You earn it over time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
good question.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, so, question, yes.
So we have a question from Facebook Live. The question is, how often should you check your credit report?
Great question, thank you.
Do you want to do yours answer and I'll do my answer?
Sure. There are a few different ways you can do that.
Right.
One of the ways that came out several years ago is annualcreditreport.com. Our society and our government has established the fact that, hey, credit is so important in our citizens' lives these days. We want to make sure everyone has access to that, so that we as citizens understand the impact of our credit on our business, our lives. And so that's out there, and you can get one from each of the credit bureaus each year.
Sure,
Each 12
sure.
months.
And I think the question specifically was how often. So I guess, you know what, it really depends on your specific needs. And I guess if you've ever had any issues, maybe somebody trying to fraudulently open up an account, maybe because I'm old school, I check mine like once a year. If I happen to be making a large ticket purchase and they pull a credit report, I might say, hey, can I look at that score and see how I'm doing? Obviously nowadays, to Greg's point, there are a lot of organizations, services out there where you can sign up for monitoring. I think folks that sign up for the services, I think probably naturally you gravitate towards checking it more often. I don't know that there's really a set rule of thumb. I think it's knowing though, first of all, how to do it. And Greg mentioned myannualcreditreport.com. I think that's huge. And the 3 separate credit reporting agencies, I think we may have it in your packet, but if not, I'll make sure I go over it with you guys at some point during the session. Through our websites, we all have an educational tab, and you all have the ability to kind of go in and explore around a little bit and learn more about your credit and reporting and so forth. And also how to tackle disputes, which I think we're going to cover maybe a little bit later too.
I was just going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, we are entitled to one free credit report from each agency once a year.
Correct.
So maybe if the first 4 months you want to pull
Spread
from
them out.
Experian,
Sure.
and then pull the next one in July from TransUnion, and then Equifax, so on and so forth. So you can really compare and make sure that all the stuff on those reports is reporting the same and is accurate.
Exactly.
I
That's a good
think
point.
that's a great thing to do, and it's a free credit report, so
Yep.
why not?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, any other questions right now? Okay, so how do I check my credit report, and what do I do if something's incorrect?
Sure. So again, and the question came up through Facebook. So we talk about annualcreditreport.com. Disputes, obviously, if you got a dispute, it's a pretty straightforward process. You work with that particular creditor that you had the issue, the particular product or card that you had the issue with, whatever the issue may be. So you get the facts from kind of that side of the table, and then you find out the credit report that was pulled, whether it was an Equifax, TransUnion, or Experian, and you work directly. All 3 credit reporting agencies have a consumer relations department. They have a disputes department. You're going to work directly with them, and they're basically going to hold your hand through the process, and they're going to take you through the dispute process. Good, bad, and different, whatever the outcome is, it's important to know that you have a resource at the credit reporting agencies to help you out. Again, it's also important that you get that creditor involved, whether it's Sears or a large credit card company, whoever it is, because you want to be getting information from both sides, and you want to have both sides working to go ahead and try to mitigate and take care of that dispute for you.
I highly encourage everyone to keep copies of correspondence between yourself and whoever you're dealing with at the agencies, because if you call and say, oh, I talked with Susan, well, who's Susan?
Right, that's a good
So
point.
you want to do your due diligence as well to make sure you're keeping track of everything so you know where everything stands. Okay, any questions about checking your credit? On Facebook? No? All right. Pretty easy class tonight. So, okay, a know everything's accurate, but it's not as high as I want it to be. I want to get it to that next notch on the belt, right? So how do I establish credit? Well, let me rephrase this. Let's say you have a young credit history, somebody who's just starting out. How do they establish credit if they don't have any? It's kind of difficult if we can't get a credit card if we have no credit history, right? So is there anything we can do to get that moving along?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are some traditional ways to establish credit from a blank slate. It's not difficult for us to obtain credit cards, as you probably receive in the mail or through your emails all the time, offers for credit. And there are many creditors that will be more than willing to give you new credit, just in the form of a credit card. If for some reason you don't want one or you're having trouble in that area, there's actually something called a shared secured loan, which a lot of folks don't even know about, but it's a very simple process, and we offer them at Congressional Federal as a loan product. And the beauty of this product is that we don't hold a credit report at all to determine if someone would qualify for that type of a loan. All you would need is some money in the savings account, and we would put those funds on hold for the time that you have the loan. It's still your money, just sits there earning interest, and we would give you a loan on the side, and you can just pay that back, and that starts to build up your credit. So that's another nice thing that you might want to look at if you're starting to establish credit. And one of the most important things is that once you start getting 1, 2, or 3 items on your credit report, that we talked about a little bit earlier, establishing credit is getting those things in the first place, but then also setting them up for the right trajectory going forward. You want to make sure you're not missing payments right at the beginning, because you don't have a lot of other things, a lot of history in your credit report to offset any derogatory items or missed payments or things like that. So to establish credit, get those types of products, then make sure you manage them quite well. And of course you want to manage them for the rest of the time, but it's very important at the beginning because it's hard to recover once your score dips really low, and it takes a long time to recover. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, I was just looking down at the note I made. One other way is you can always have a cosigner as well. You know, we think of cosigners with our first car, things like that. You can have a cosigner, you know, if a relative or a family member are willing to co-sign on a credit card with you. The beauty of it is hopefully you're doing it with somebody that's been responsible with credit. You're both getting benefit of that established credit. It's reporting on both credit files. So again, I think it's important that the person that you're potentially going to get to co-sign for you obviously has a good history of managing credit. But it's a great way to build it. You know, maybe starting out if you don't have a card. The only thing that also comes to mind for me is, and something I did early on was, I got a gas credit card. They're pretty easily applied for because their interest rates are pretty high, but it's something you use a lot nowadays when you're traveling. They're convenient, like an easy pass. The thing with a gas card, the other things to kind of think about though is because the APRs are higher, you obviously want to try to pay them in full each month. But it's, in terms of applying for and getting granted the card, a gas card's another option out there to start establishing and building credit.
Right. So spending habits, paying on time, that's huge, right? So what other good habits can you suggest to help build it or increase my credit score? Is there anything else you can think of?
Sure. So number one, imagine that paying bills on time, because we talked about when we looked at the categories that drive the credit score is payment history. Not only the length of the history, but how you've made payments on those accounts that you've established. So paying them on time, building good credit, pay ahead when you can, pay more than the minimums, obviously for obvious reasons. Applying for credit in moderation, thinking about not going out maybe in a 2 or 3 month time frame and just applying for every card you can, because again, that algorithm we talked about looks at different factors, and it looks at the amount of debt that you have out there, the utilization of the debt. So it's like what Greg said, and I think what you're going to hear kind of on and off throughout this seminar tonight, it's a balance, right? Do something here, it can affect you this way, and you do something. So it's always a trade-off, and you always got to be thinking about it. Review the credit report. We talked about that. That's a good habit to get into. just to see that, hey, am I getting credit for something that I signed up for a few months ago? Is that reporting? And is it reporting accurately? I'm making my payments. Am I benefiting from being responsible with my credit? Just trying to think of anything else jumps out at me.
Yeah, I'll add to that. One of the things that really helps, keep a good credit score and a good habit is to keep your balances on your revolving credit card limits relatively low to those limits. One of the big factors in the calculation of your credit score is how much actual debt do you have in relation to your credit card limits, right? So if you have a limit of $10,000 and your debt is $2,000, then the credit score looks at that and says, hey, you're at 20%. You're at 20% utilization of that available credit to you. And the credit score rewards those that keeps those balances low in proportion to those limits. And it goes down, it hurts you when those balances are high in relation to those limits. So that's another great way to just keep in mind how you can help improve your score is to keep those balances low in relation to those limits.
Is there a magic percentage number that we want to kind of stay around when we're utilizing our credit?
About 20% is generally recognized as where you want to be for the best possible outcomes. Once you start getting north of 20, north of 50, it really starts to bring down your score in that area.
Question?
Another question from Facebook Live. So I've seen companies advertise to fix your credit score in 30 days or more. Is this an option you would recommend? Also, what options would you advise with something like this and improving your score?
That's a great question. It comes up all the time. I'll ask the person that asked that question and everyone in the audience, who's responsible for your credit and your credit score? You are.
Not a trick question.
Not a trick question. There is nobody in the world that's going to take care of your credit. Right? You are. And so what I say that to say that there are organizations out there that can certainly help you, and some are great. Some really are there to help you. Some are there to earn money or earn income because they're not doing it for free. A lot of the business model of a lot of these organizations is they'll help you repay your debt, consolidate your debt, provide counseling. They'll take your money and they'll disperse your money to pay all your creditors and your debts for you. And in return, what they do is they ask those lenders to give them a kickback because they got some money on behalf of the loans that you owe for. So there's nothing magical that they're going to do for you. So I guess my point is you're in control of your credit, and certainly be wary of folks that are asking for money up front to magically cure your credit in a very short amount of time.
Time heals all. That's pretty much the story right there. Give it time and it'll increase as long as you continue to make payments and stay on the positive end of things, right?
Yep. You're in it for the long haul. I kind of think of it like that because, you think about you go through different cycles in life. You get married, you have kids, you buy a house, and I know I've seen mine fluctuate a little bit because of that, right? You take on new debt that you didn't expect to take on, but at the end of the day, it can all work out, and it's just a matter of, maintaining good habits. We're not always taught those right off the bat, but it's, through sessions like this, self-promoting a little bit, hopefully it's learning things that you can do and understanding the resources that are out there to help you guys, and just being smart about it. We're all impulsive sometimes, but it's just keeping things in perspective and just managing it, because I think it's like you said, it's easy to once you get it, it takes a while to build it up and get that trust, and it's easy to lose it though. And you do a couple of things wrong, and it drives it down, and it can take some time to build it back up again. So it's just always kind of something to keep in the forefront of your mind.
That also goes, if you have ever checked the credit report, this is a personal story, not for me, but from a family member. They actually had identity theft, and it was on their credit report that they didn't know until they applied for a job and were denied because there was an arrest warrant supposedly out. So, identity theft kind of feeds into the credit report, but that's a whole other subject, but just that's one way to keep an eye on your credit report as well. Anything that seems incorrect or just out of the ordinary. So, question, yes?
So some of these are third-party companies
companies like, creditReport.com or Credit Karma or whatever, are they like accurate, at all? Accurate on and up to date? Would that be a
With
good
the
way?
Credit Karma and annual report, so annualreport.com should be fairly accurate, correct me if I'm wrong. Credit Karma, I would be a little, do you want to?
Yeah, I think it, honestly, I think it gets back to it's all of us are as good as the data that's being supplied to us, right, from the credit grantors. If the data is being reported accurately, and sometimes people are human, right? Sometimes there's a mistake in how the data is being transferred, or how the file is received, or what have you, or the timing of it. But as long as the data, and again, from my perspective, my experience, as long as the data is coming from those granting credit bodies and parties, institutions, it should be something that you can rely on and trust. And again, I think it's to Greg's point. We own it, right? I own my credit, so and I'm not that diligent with that. But if I'm following up on it, I'm checking it more often, I'm seeing something maybe that doesn't make sense, or a missed payment, and I know darn well I wrote that coupon last month, it's up to me to step in and correct it, and don't let it fester and continue to run wild. Just go out there and take care of it, quite frankly.
But those are third-party organizations. So again, you have yourself and you have your credit report through TransUnion, Experian, and whatnot. And all those third parties are doing is going to the credit bureau, getting it, and presenting it to you. So in theory, it should be perfectly accurate.
Have a question?
So to Jay's point, let's say you do step in because you find an error and you decide to dispute it. How long does it take for that action to reflect on your credit report?
I don't know if I know the exact timing of that. I think once that may be a takeaway for me in terms of the exact timing of how long it can take to. So once the dispute's finalized, I don't want to give out an incorrect answer. Let me follow up on that one. I actually don't get that question very often. The timing of when the dispute is then corrected and now reporting on your consumer file.
Yeah, in my experience, when I've seen cases like that, obviously there's a research process.
Sure.
Once there's a determination that something is going to be corrected, the credit bureaus will do that right away. But it may not reflect until 30 days later or a month in when everything's reported.
The cycle of the reporting.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So maybe a rule of thumb would be, so to Greg's point, once the dispute has been resolved, you've got confirmation, right? Because we're keeping records of these communications back and forth. That 30 to 60-day window to give the creditor and their credit reporting agency time to sync up, because remember, everybody does report differently in terms of when the files come over. Some are daily, some are weekly, some are monthly. So now that I kind of step back and rethink my answer, I think 30 to 60 days from the time that the dispute has been acknowledged as resolved, I think would be safe to say that it should report that way in your credit file.
Any other questions in the room? 2 questions, all right, sir.
Regarding the credit utilization, is it smart for the person to cancel a card that they don't really use, or should they just let that stay on the report just to increase their overall percentage of credit?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Very astute, because again, as Jay mentioned a little bit before, one action that you might take to affect your credit will have an equal and opposite reaction somewhere else. So when you are closing accounts that you're not using anymore, that can be very beneficial to you because it allows your financial life to be simpler. You can keep track of all your accounts better, and that's great. What you may have also done is you may have shortened or cut off the length of your credit history that you have to your name. So if I had a credit card that I got 20 years ago and I haven't used it since, I might think, let me just get rid of it. But if I close it, now my length of open credit history jumps to whatever my next oldest one is, which might have been 3 years ago. So now I went from 20 years of good established long history to 3. So you really just have to think about what's the best answer for you. I've seen cases where people, over time, just like in our house, we accumulate stuff, and before we know it, we have too much of it. And I've seen folks that have, way too many accounts. They might have 15 different credit cards that they've accumulated over the past 20 years. And a good rule of thumb is just to say, hey, find the 3 or 4 that you're really going to use that have the best rate, the best rewards, the best benefits, the best perks, travel rewards, car rentals, insurance, all that great stuff. And really focus on those. And if it helps to close out a few accounts, that's not going to kill your credit score. It's not going to make it go down significantly. But these are all the things we have to keep in mind. So it's a little bit of a gray answer. Did that at least help answer the question?
Yeah. But to your point, it is a balancing act, though, right? Because I've read some financial planners where you can say, you know what, cut the card up, put it away somewhere where you're not going to use it. I think now that I think about it, though, because we're promoting going out and maybe getting in the habit of reviewing your report at least on a yearly basis, you may not remember that out of college you opened up a Bank of America credit card, right? So now it's been on your history for 10 years. Versus to Greg's point, you opened up something 3 years ago, or maybe you've got multiple ones from 10 years ago and a couple that are more recent. Kind of pick and choose your battle now that you understand how the score is calculated. And aside from some of the items that Greg mentioned in terms of true benefits to you as an individual, the APR, the perks, things like that, maybe try to cross one out, cancel one out, knowing that maybe you still have a bread and butter one on there that's been there for that same 10 years. Because it is important, and as you learned today, it's one of the higher percentages that's used in the calculation of the score. And I know a lot of people don't think of it that way, so that was a great question.
I have read that overall age of your accounts is averaged out over all of your cards. So keep that in mind too. That just to their point, if you had a card 10, 20 years,
Yep.
you might not want to close that one.
Right,
So,
right.
because it's going to shorten it. So. All right. So moving right along. Any other question?
So earlier you said that one of the things that goes into calculating your score is the type of account you have. So is there a certain type of account that's better than another? Is a car loan better than a credit card?
Yeah, I don't have the exact mix in that percentage, and that's why, and to your point, that was the 10% one, the mix of accounts, let me double, yeah. So it's a lower percentage weighted value, right, in that algorithm that's comprising that score makeup of that Fico score. Other than saying it's 10% of the mix, I think the safe way to go is it's always good if you can to have a blend, so you're not just having open-ended credit revolving accounts with no installments. I think typically if you can have a mix, is probably ideally the best way to go. But it is only 10% of the score, so maybe keep that in mind. Maybe don't dwell on that too much. Don't worry about that too much because it's not it's not that 35% weighted factor. But anything to add?
Yeah, I think car loans are car loans to the credit reports, to the credit scores. Credit cards are very, very similar in that respect. Once you start having really derogatory items on your credit report, that's when you really see the big decrease in the scores. So different types of car loans, you're not going to really see a difference in the score, but if you have judgments and collection items, loans that are past due or charged off, that's where you're going to really see a big difference in your score.
All right. Thank you. Well, another question. Yes.
What about medical collections?
Ooh, medical collections. How
Medical
does that work?
collections.
Do they show up on your credit?
They do.
Absolutely.
They do.
Yep.
Yes, they do. Just like any other collection item, it shows as a bill unpaid by the consumer. And unfortunately, medical collections does happen more often than we would like because we go to the doctor, we pay our bill, all of a sudden there's an insurance company involved in helping to satisfy that bill in full. And sometimes that doesn't happen unbeknownst to us. So those do show up on your credit report and they affect it greatly. Another good reason to check your credit report from time to time because it happens to the best of us.
Have you ever, I had an issue. I broke my arm a few years ago, and I got all these medical bills from the ambulance company, from the hospital at once, and I went, oh my gosh, how am I gonna pay all these bills right now? And I actually called the individual places and said, hey, I can't pay it in full today, but can I do it over a few months? And they were absolutely happy I called them first and foremost, and it kept my credit in the green, if you will, because I'm not gonna have a late payment. So if you ever run into those situations, give them a call, talk to the places that are, you might owe money or owe collections to, so it's always worth the question, really. All right, well, let's shake things up a little bit. Is everybody looks sleepy? So we're gonna play a game, all right? In your folders and on Facebook Live, if you wanna type in true or false on Facebook Live, you can do that for us, that'd be perfect. But in your folders, for those in the room, we have a true and false fun game for you. So, let's be honest, there's so many questions we have about credit, and there's so many things that can be misleading. So, let's just play a little truth and false game right now. So, will I always have good credit if I get credit cards and never use them? So let's just say I got a bunch of credit cards and I never use them.
A little bit of what we learned tonight, so.
False. Yay, everybody put false. Everybody did. All right. You want to just touch on that?
Elaborate a little bit, yeah. So a little bit of what we talked about tonight, right? So it's important to establish credit, but establishing it's great, but you also have to have some use so you can start to establish payment history. The length of credit's important, obviously, but utilization is important because it's like driving a car and it sits in the garage. It's maybe that's not the greatest analogy, but you got to be out there using it as well, so that you can start to show that you're credit responsible, basically.
Perfect. Next question: checking a credit report will hurt your score.
Hope not. We promoted an awful lot.
Right. Answer.
Right?
Just make sure.
That's right. That's right. It does not.
Pay attention.
Right. And the questions, it's you individually. Actually, it does not. So you as an individual checking it does not hurt it. The question wasn't going out and checking it to buy furniture or to open up. It's you going out and monitoring and checking it that does not have an impact on your credit score.
One of the questions I get a lot in lending is, well, if I apply for a loan, will that bring down my score? If I apply for that furniture or that mortgage or whatever it is that I'm asking for to obtain credit, will that affect my score? And that is what is called a hard score. I think many of us are familiar with that. Hard score will start to show as an inquiry on your credit report, because everybody else in the world, all the other lenders that might be looking at your credit report to make some sort of approval or determination, are going to want to see, hey, where are they shopping for credit? And that's why you don't want to go all over town all the time asking for credit, because that's a risk to the lender. The lender might say, I'm not sure I want to give this person a loan if I know they're going down the street with 5 other lenders at the same time.
Right.
Something's going on here. So when you apply for a loan, that is considered a hard inquiry, and when you start to accumulate too many of those, it will start to slightly bring down your score. Nothing really to worry about. But again, to Jay's point, when you're monitoring your credit and checking it yourself through the credit bureaus or annualcreditreport.com, that's considered a soft hit, and that does not affect your score.
So what about all those pre-approved credit card offers I get in the mail that I love so much?
Those are where financial institutions and lenders have inquired into your credit, done a soft hit onto you as a consumer, and said, this is a consumer we would like to lend money to or provide services to, and that's considered a soft hit.
So that won't affect.
Correct.
Got it. All right. Moving my credit balances around from credit card to credit card will help hide my debt. Is that true or false? All right.
What do you guys think? It's false, right? Providing, again, we talked, it gets back to reporting and so forth, because, majority of organizations out there now, financial institutions, credit grantors, are reporting. They're reporting accurately. Things have gotten a lot better with automation in the last 10 to 15 years. So you may think you're trying to kind of hide from somebody, but at the end of the day, it's ultimately going to surface. Again, which is why we're trying to profess good credit habits. You know, starting out with a good foundation. We need to do this seminar probably for a lot of high schools, quite frankly, the more I think about it, because you get exposed to a lot of times in school or maybe a first job or something like that, and you don't really have a good frame of mind or reference to really understand what's going on. So, but nope, that is false. It's gonna stay with you, unfortunately. You might get away with it for a month or so, but it'll ultimately show up.
So you don't recommend opening a credit card for the introductory balance rate or the introductory rate at 0% and then opening another credit card 6 months later and another 6 months later. You're telling us not to do that, right?
There are pros and cons. There are pros and cons. If I am paying 0% as compared to 20% on my money, that alone can save me money. But as we talked about, if I'm also opening up credit all over town every 6 months, you're going to have another impact on your score of opening up a lot of accounts, and all of a sudden you lose track of where you are in this game, and now you miss a payment. So simple is better, but that is certainly something that a lot of institutions are using is to attract customers, is to provide 0% interest for a period of time.
Any questions? Oh, question.
Does your cell phone bill improve your credit score if it's paid in full every month?
Now that's a great question. There are actually a lot of bills that we pay every month, every day, that are not reported to your credit report,
Right.
such as cell phones, tuition, childcare, preschool,
There's utility type bills.
utilities, exactly, your water, we talked about your phone, your internet, things like that. But when you don't pay them, they can show up on your credit report as a derogatory item. They show up as a collection item. So that's a great question. There's a lot of things that don't show up unless we don't pay them.
All right. Any questions? Okay, just making sure. Okay, so understanding our credit. So when we're applying for that credit card or that loan, as a lender, what are you usually looking at?
Yes, as a lender, again, being in the industry for many years, I love the story that I can try to uncover when I review a loan application, because every application is telling me a story. And it's my job to figure out what is that story and what's the risk I'm looking at. Should I give this person a loan or not, is the bottom line. So we're going to pull your credit. We're going to look at all the factors on your credit report. We're going to look at your score, first and foremost. We're going to look at your level of debts. Are you moving debts around a lot? That's a red flag for a lender. We can see that if you are consolidating unsecured debt over here, we can see when you opened one account and when you closed it and when you moved it over here and opened it over here and then moved it over here. We want to see a pattern of debt reduction, not debt escalation. So when we look over time and when you open each account, how much debt have you accumulated over time? So we look at your level of debts. We look at how have you repaid those debts, of course. Have you missed any payments? And we're trying to uncover what's the risk here. Is this person on their way up financially in their debt life, or are they on the cliff? And what I've done in my career many times is I look at loans that have actually gone bad, loans that where the person has not been able to fulfill that obligation. It charged off, it showed up on the credit report, the financial institution took a loss. And many, many times when we go back and look at what their application looked like when they applied for that loan, it was they were escalating debt. And that's a red flag as a lender. So I'm going to look at your level of unsecured debt. I'm going to look at how you paid your debts, and I'm going to try to figure out where are you going in your financial life.
Next question.
Along those lines, before I worked for a credit union, I worked for a bank for many, many years. And isn't it true that debt consolidation loans is something that the credit union will do for members, but banks are not excited about doing for their customers?
You do see it more prevalent in the credit union industry, and that is something we offer at Congressional, because we have a debt consolidation loan program, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. If you're able to simplify your finances by taking 5 different personal loans and consolidating them into one loan to make your life easier, that's a very good thing. Again, as we've talked about, you're not hiding that debt, you're just moving it from one place to another. Certainly the interest rate on that could be very beneficial to you if you're taking high interest rates and lowering it to a lower rate, that's going to save you money. But to answer your question, it is a little bit more prevalent in the credit union industry because we're looking to help our members and make sure we're getting them to reduce their debt and not take on more.
So let's decide to co-sign on a loan with somebody. How does that affect myself and the co-signer? I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but is there anything that we need to be really aware of?
That's a great question. So what does it really mean to co-sign for a loan? As a lender, I've heard many times in my career, oh, I'm not responsible for that loan, I just co-sign for it. Not true. You are fully responsible for a debt if you co-sign that debt. And so we have to be careful whether we are asked to co-sign for a loan or if we're asking somebody else in our family or friends to co-sign for us. I've also seen the argument that, well, this was my loan. Yes, I got this car for me. It was my loan. My cousin co-signed so I could get that loan. I'm not going to have to really worry about it because I know my cousin will take care of it. Well, also a myth, because you're responsible for your own debts, and if you don't pay it, it brings down your credit score. If your cousin doesn't pay it, it brings down your credit score. So my advice to everyone is, when you co-sign for a loan, all it means is you're a second borrower, and you are fully obligated to that debt. You can be sued if you don't pay it back. And never assume that the other person that's on that loan with you is making all the payments, because if they don't, it's going to bring down your score as well. So it's very important to understand.
Okay, so we kind of touched on the credit counseling or consolidation earlier, but when do I really need to consider it? When do I need to say, okay, I need to talk to somebody and I need help?
Yeah, credit counseling, you hear a lot about that these days. You see advertisements on it on TV. Again, I just want to stress that there's no magic organization out there that can fix your credit. There are organizations, there are non-for-profit organizations that truly are there to help you. For example, at Congressional, if you go to our website, we have an organization that we work with called Balance. And they are a third-party organization, and one of the benefits of membership at Congressional Federal is this free financial counseling. They're not there to sell you a thing, they're just there to help you. It's one of the great benefits of being a credit union member. And they're there to help make a budget, find out where your holes are in your budget, find out how you can improve your credit, and work with you on those areas. But again, be wary of those that are asking for a fee to fix your credit. They may not have your best interest in mind. They're in it for themselves, of course. So if you have any questions about financial counseling, you can always come to us at the credit union. We'd be happy to help.
All right, well, thank you both. Thank you everyone for taking part and just keeping it interactive this evening. I just want to open up to questions, just general questions. If there's something we might not have touched on, or if there's something you want a little bit more of information on, please, we could go ahead and have a little Q&A session right now if you'd like. And we'll go ahead. Did anybody have any other questions that we might not have been covered? Yes.
Well, about credit utilization, so you have a few different accounts. You said the magic number is around 20% or so. Would that be on an individual card or your overall credit available to you?
It's going to look at the overall.
Okay.
Yes. So if you have, 5 different cards with a zero balance and one that's maxed out, you're still going to look at the overall. Yeah.
So what do you
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Great question.
Any other questions that we might not have covered or touched on? Yes.
So many of us have long-term debt, such as student loans. So for something that takes more time to pay off, how does that affect your credit history?
Oh, that's a great question. Student loans, very big topic these days in our society. We hear a lot about the level of debts that Americans have on student loans. What we see on credit reports is two types of student loans. One is the deferred student loan so that when you're done with school, then interest repayment. And then, of course, when you are in repayment, they show on your credit report as a normal payment due. And there are many organizations out there as well that would be happy to consolidate your student loans. You hear a lot these days about SoFi and some of the other organizations that are getting into that business. Unfortunately, student loans sometimes are very high balances, and so you don't want to necessarily pay them off with credit cards, which might cost you a greater expense. If you go to financial institutions that have personal loans, sometimes they cap those at $10, $20, $30, $50,000, and some student loans are well into six figures. So we have actually a student loan consolidation program at Congressional where we go up to $125,000 for undergraduate debt and up to $175,000 for graduate school debt. And it's a way to get a lower interest rate, consolidate them all into one, and save money in the long run. So there's many opportunities for that as well.
Good question. Yes, another question.
You mentioned credit counseling. Do you think that that's something that people should do at a younger age, maybe high school? We talked about high school. Would you recommend maybe high school students coming in and also getting financial counseling as well?
In terms of counseling, meaning this type of kind of credit education, credit overview?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think there's been platforms and I guess people out there kind of promoting them in the last few years because of how credit has become more mainstream in the last 10 years, and people are more aware of it and how to get involved in their own credit. And yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's ever too young. The appropriate age maybe in high school, maybe senior year or something like that, when you're getting ready to go off and join the military or go to college or what have you. I think it's the earlier you can kind of establish that baseline foundation knowledge. I think you're only ultimately probably doing future members and consumers and customers of your organizations a benefit as well.
Yeah, a lot of school districts around the country have seen the need for that in the last 10 years and really developed some criteria or curriculum for that as well. And it's funny because when you think about it, up until then and these days, we train our young adults on everything from math and science, which is all great stuff. We learn so much information in school, but we all are going to have to deal with money in our lives. 100% of us. Every single one of us is going to have to deal with our credit. So I believe, it's never been more important these days with all the tools and resources out there and the importance of credit to start young. Absolutely.
Oh, another question. Sorry, welcome over there.
So in regard to student loans, I specifically wanted to ask, because one of the measurements for the credit score is establishing credit history. If you have a loan and you pay it off in full, how does that affect your payment history? And does it decrease or does it look bad on you or not?
Great question. Any loan that you pay off in full will remain on your credit history for 7 years. And so having a loan paid off is a great thing. It's great for your finances. And as far as your credit score goes, as long as you made those payments on time, that's a great thing, and that will continue to benefit your score even if it's paid off. Now, again, as we talked about, there's pros and cons. As a lender, the purpose of having a credit score and building credit is not to just have it and not use it. Lenders, cell phone companies, rental agencies, they want to see that you've had it and continue to have it and continue to demonstrate and prove that you can manage it. So, again, paying off the debt, congratulations. I mean, that's fantastic. We all want to get there. But the next time that you go to apply for a loan, the lender is most likely still going to want to see that you're continuing in your life of credit, and you are continuing to be able to manage your credit. So there's a balance there, but I'm not sure if that answers your question, but to pay it off will continue to positively affect your credit history.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And I think just to add to Greg's point, I mean, I think there's obviously certain types of accounts where inevitably they're going to be paid off, right? A car, mortgage, student loans, things like that. Absolutely, that's a milestone. And that's a pat on the back, and you're going to be rewarded for that on your credit file. And again, then I think that balance comes in where you've got other types of accounts, those revolving credit type accounts that are, chances are you're probably still going to have open some of those, and they're on your report, and they're still building that momentum like Greg talked about when we first started. Slowly moving in the right direction, up or down, depending upon the performance of how you're handling your credit. But yeah, absolutely don't walk away today thinking, well, I'm gonna milk that a little bit more.
No,
No,
right.
you definitely want to pay that off, and man, that's nice. And if you don't have to take another big thick coupon book with that type of loan, more power to you.
Thank you for the question. Any other question over here?
Yeah, I have a question in a similar vein. I heard the 7-year number that, like you were saying, a paid off loan would stay on your credit report for 7 years. And isn't that the same for something negative? So if you missed a payment, say 8 years ago, but it was still on your credit report, that's something you can request be taken off as long as it stay on there for 7 years?
Yeah, 7 years is the magic mark where any information will typically show up on your credit report. After that, they do drop off. So,
But isn't that a major thing that people find that are problems with credit reports? Like if you request yours, a lot of times there could be an error with that.
In terms of you mean dispute situations?
Right.
Yeah, and I think I can't speak personally about it because I don't, I've never had that. I don't really talk to people that deal with that too often in my work capacity. But I think really the whole point behind tonight is it's getting more involved. To Greg's point, and I actually had a list of the retention cycle. So good accounts from the date of the last activity, those positive performing accounts are on there for 10 years. They call adverse accounts, 7 years from the date of the first delinquency. So that's that 7-year time frame. I'm just going to kind of do the broader categories. Inquiries from the date that your consumer report was pulled for that opening that account up. An inquiry remains on your consumer file for 2 years. Let's see. Civil judgments, foreclosures, 7 year from the date that it's filed. You hear a lot about bankruptcy. They're like, oh, you might want to think twice about calling the bankruptcy lawyer. I kind of say that anecdotally, but 10 years for Chapter 7. So that kind of stuff stays out there because that's such a big, impactful statement about how you've handled your credit maybe, or if you had some issues with it. So you're certainly not rewarded for it, right? In the instance that it's going to stay on there for 10 years. So, but yeah, but to your point, I think it's just being more in tune with your specific situation, and absolutely, you've got the right. If anything, take away from today, this is your baby. It's a representation of you. We said early on, it is a snapshot of your personal financial obligation history. And I'm not just promoting it because I'm sitting up here, but really take it seriously. And to Greg's point, I think the younger you are in life when you can learn about this kind of stuff, I think we're all going to benefit because all of our rates will hopefully get better. And you think about things like that, performance out there in the industry.
Did I see another question?
Yeah, I was wondering about inquiries staying on for 2 years. And I know it's not a big factor in the score, but so say you're shopping for a mortgage or a house, and it's taking a long time. And so they have to keep looking at your file every 3 months. And then the inquiries kind of keep showing up, but it's all from the same lender. Would someone looking at a file like that know what's going on, or would it start to get really adverse?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, from the lender's perspective, we would know, and it's very evident to us.
Yep.
When someone's shopping for a home, shopping for a car, we can see that, and that we don't look at that as a negative. We just think they're living their lives, and they have a need for a car or a home. And then as far as the score goes, it's my understanding that they do the score itself, the credit bureaus, the FICO, lump certain like inquiries together in a certain period of time. Now, I'm not from FICO. I mean, I heard it's a week, so I'm not sure. But if you see a lot of inquiries on a certain type of transaction in a short amount of time, it doesn't negatively affect the score, right?
But then say like if you wanted a house and didn't get it, whatever, you know, and then it takes another 3 months to find another
That
one.
could
then
be
you have
another
to pull it
inquiry,
in,
yeah.
And that's kind of, at least what's going on here. I've got 4 inquiries from the same lender over a year
Yeah.
looking for a house. So
If you're doing everything else the way that we've been professing tonight, no, in the big picture, I think that's why it was important that when Greg and I and the team thought about the type of information we want to convey for this seminar, the basics, right? Building the foundation of credit, understanding the score, how it's calculated, things like that. It is only 10% of the calculation. And Greg, you're right. I don't know the exact time frame, but I know like mortgage and automobiles, those types of classified large installment purchases, you can be shopping for, let's just say, a week to 2 weeks, and they are kind of lumped together, almost deduped, if you will. So it's not weighted like a revolving credit card inquiry, for example. It's treated a little bit differently. And again, in the big picture, it's still only 10% of that calculation. So if that's happening to you, find the house that's going to make you happy, and I think you're going to be okay.
Trying to.
Another question.
Greg, you oversee large portfolios of credit card and large portfolio of consumer loans. Do you have an idea or a feeling what the delinquency rate is, whether or not an auto debit is set up to make the payments, or whether or not the consumer is mailing in or using their own bill payments? Is there a difference in the delinquency?
Typically there is a very significant difference. Delinquencies, typically around the country for auto loans or credit cards are somewhere in the 3% range nationwide. And you're going to see a much better delinquency rate, a lower delinquency rate, meaning better, of course, for those that have auto transactions, auto payments. I don't know a specific number for that, but in my experience and being in the industry and what I do, it's significant. People really help maintain their credit score, their long-term history by setting up their payments on those automatic payments. And that way, if something happens, if they're on vacation, if they miss one, it doesn't occur because they're set up on automatic transactions. So that's a great way to help your credit score stay high.
Another tip is that payment should stay the same if you have a fixed interest on it. So that payment will remain the same. You know how much is going to be deducted every time your payment's due. Unlike maybe your electricity bill or your water bill might fluctuate. So, that exact amount that's going to come out of your checking account when that bill is due. I know I personally set a lot of reminders in my phone because that way I don't forget and they pop up and go, oh, your bill's being paid today. Oh, yay. So, perfect. Any other questions? All right. Well, that concludes the whole evening. I encourage and ask that you fill out our seminar evaluation sheet. We greatly appreciate it, and you'll get entered to win our $20 Amazon gift card. Who doesn't love Amazon, right? I love it. But if you have any questions or you want to talk to us one-on-one, please feel free to come up to us after. And if you're in the room, sorry, Facebook Live, but please feel free to grab a goodie bag. Those are for everybody here. So happy Wednesday. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.